So, you are probably wondering to yourself this very familiar question. With Hyacinth's release, should you pull for her Eidolon 1 or should you pull for her signature Lycone? Do you need to pull for a Hyacinth if you already have an E2 Caceres? Should you pull for a DPS Eidolon or should you pull for a support Eidolon? Should you pull for a Lycone or should you pull for the Lycone only without the unit? And I think this question has been asked a lot of times, not just in Honkai Starbucks, but pretty much every gacha game in existence, at least gacha games that actually have a horrendable dupe system. Not my goat Epic 7, by the way. Epic 7 doesn't care about dupes. But for these kind of games in the recent couple of months or some years, right? One could say dupes and their limited weapons, limited artifacts, limited Lycones, they have become almost like a norm to get them as a player. Because it is not just a simple matter of plus 5% HP, plus 5% attack, plus 2% crit rate. Some of these dupes are game-changing dupes. Literally game-changing, as you guys are, I'm sure you guys are aware. Oh wait, I have no Caceres, so I can't show you guys the E2 Caceres. Or even, for example, right, we have our classic E1 Trippy, we have the classic E2 Herta. A lot of the DPSs nowadays also unlock a majority of their power within multiple Eidolons, right? Multiple copies of a single unit, their signature weapon, right? Their signature weapon. Who the hell plays an E0 deal in 2025, etc., etc. Now, I can't speak with regards to games that I'm not as familiar with, at least compared to Honkai Starbucks. So I will just talk about Honkai Starbucks today. Maybe shut the fuck. Yeah, I'll just talk about Honkai Starbucks today. So this will be the definitive guide in pooling for Eidolons in 2025. To be fair, it's also going to be inclusive of signature weapon, but just for the sake of the thumbnail and the title, we are going to be talking about it from the definitive guide to pooling your Eidolons, right? So first things first, why do you pull Eidolons? Why do you pull signature Lycones? Why do you want to pull them, especially at that specific point of time? Yo, by the way, editor, I'm just rambling on, so like just play like fat footage behind, or like just play random footage behind all the other, right? So why, right? And I would say, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think most people probably put Eidolons to make that unit stronger. Yep. You probably put for that E1 to get yourself a better performance. Again, this is just in Honkai Starbucks term, in the end game content that you're going to be facing right now. You could say some people, like there was this crazy guy that I reviewed on TikTok and YouTube Shorts. He put for like an E6 Caceres that's left at level 1, E2 Bubbin at level 1, E2 Firefly, E6 Firefly at level 1, right? You could have some sort of this kind of people around in the world. But I would say for most of the population that are playing Honkai Starbucks, you most likely put an Eidolon or a signature Lycone to make that unit stronger, to get better performance in endgame content, to clear the endgame content with a greater degree of comfort, ease, or lesser difficulty compared to if you did not pull for the Eidolons. And this is a very, very important question that you should be asking yourself as a player, right? Not as someone that is like comparing dicks with your friends, like, oh my god, my E2 Caceres does 5 times more damage than your E0 Caceres, go fuck yourself. Or like, it is not as a validation for anyone outside than yourself, because at the end of the day, you are the person deciding to play this gacha game, and you are the only person that will determine the enjoyment they are getting out of this gacha game. That's going to be, in this case, Honkai Starbucks. So why do I want to ask this question? Is because, right, if you want to talk about pooling Eidolons and making your unit stronger, in HSR, there's no such thing as PvP. There's no such thing as role raid. There's no such thing as a raid boss. No competitive, anything in that sort, especially not tied to a unit item. Maybe there might be PvP like the Seal Splash, the Seal event. We're going to have the Mario Kart PvP, all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, in the PvE refreshable endgame content, you most likely have felt the urge to pull for an Eidolon after you see how crazy good they are in this current format. So for example, right now, I'm just going to use MOC because MOC, I'm pretty sure, is going to be the most familiar form of endgame content that we have all played since day one. Caceres, she is ridiculously good. Some might even say too good against Pollux, right? Pollux as a boss design, he was, I would dare say, literally designed to make Casterus feel like a goddess. Alright? It was the easiest zero cycle I've ever done in my entire channel's history on the earth. The moment I slept in a full team of E0, Casterus, RMC, Trippy, on full auto, we get zero cycle on the first try. That was how accessible this boss was. And keep in mind, in the early access server, right, the gears are also not that good because they basically give you this predetermined row of relics they just use unless you want to spend the amount of time like re-rolling and making your own relics. But I didn't really bother. Other than Casterus, I cooked up a little bit better for Casterus and maybe a little bit trippy. But other than that, my point is, Pollux as this unit right here, it makes your unit feel strong. Just like how, especially in the recent times, you would pull an Eidolon or a signature Lycone to make your units feel strong, right? So throwback to back in those days, the difference between feeling strong, the feeling of power, the feeling of, holy shit, I just busted all over my stage with these ridiculous damage numbers. We can see this from your E0 Aircron to the E2 Aircron. We can see this from your E0 Firefly to the E2 Firefly. We can also see this from the E2 Fei Xiao, or even back in version 1, where we had E1 Blade, E1 Jingliu, E2 Imbibitor Dune, fuck, E1 Scylla. You know what I'm saying? These methods of pulling for Eidolons and signature Lycones, it has sort of been in place within HSR since day one, except that I would say very, probably the last couple of rotations in the endgame content, the bosses, the environment, the content that you are using your teams, not just a single unit, but your entire team, they are a lot more affected by the environment, less so than your Eidolons. And that's where the issue starts to come, right? That's where the potential issue for players, should you be pulling for Eidolons or a signature like when it's going to come to play? Because I think I made this video, I believe less than a few hours back, right? I made this video about this Firefly and Aglaia, right? So this was a video that I made using an E6S5 Firefly team with an E2S1 Fugue, E2S1 Rame, and okay, technically it's not S1, this is on DDD, and this is gonna be HMC Sustainless on E6S5 Firefly. Entire team costed me 22 costs, which is basically 22 5-stars, if you want to include the signature Lycone and all that kind of stuff, which I would say this team probably costed me around 3 to 3.5 thousand US dollars. Fuck my life. Yeah, in any case, right, this team, I can dare say, as a player that pulled for this unit, right, I'm doing this job because I'm not sure if you guys were there for our early days. My E6S5 Firefly, it was not out of, I wanted to feel stronger. I wanted to make them, you know, feel more powerful. It was because of our Sabaton, I think it was a 6,000 or 7,000, right? Chat has a decision to E6S5 a single unit in HSR. Chat decided for Firefly, and so here we are today. Fast forward 1 year later after that, you'll notice that for most of my content, I never really used E6S5 Firefly that much, or even my E6S5 Aircron, because they just don't really make for very good content. At least this is, I'm talking about this from a perspective of like a content creator making this kind of stuff on Honkai Starbucks, right? Most of my videos that you guys can see from my channel, they are majority of the time, especially when it comes to like Memory of Chaos, like these kind of Memory of Chaos stuff, right? It's always as relatable as non-broken E6. I've pretty much never used my E6S5 in any of the showcases when it comes to the endgame content, right? So my point is this, right? My point is this. The value of you as a player feeling stronger nowadays, you shouldn't be using your Eidolons or signature Lycone as a metric any longer. Because what could potentially happen is, okay, let's say that I pull for E2 Casterus, which is basically the strongest unit in the game right now. You pulled, you feel her power. She's absolutely fucking busted, all right? Even before Pollux, she was absolutely fucking busted. She was the strongest E2 ever, right? Absolutely ridiculous, right? You have 30% charge, 4 different effects all bundled into the E2 on top of the E1, and you had 3B, arms together. She was really vicious. So you pulled for an E2 Casterus. You wanted to feel that power. You wanted to feel the satisfaction of absolutely destroying Flame Reaver, just shitting on the guy, destroy all endgame content. You feel this sense of achievement that you have obtained by the power of E2 Casterus. Right now, in this rotation of Memory of Chaos, you most likely will also feel Casterus, E2 Casterus' ridiculous power, because Pollux, like I mentioned, is basically built for Casterus. And then you pull for Hyacinth, because Hyacinth would make the E2 casters feel even stronger, right? I hope that you guys can sort of see where this is going, because this feeling of power, right, eventually it's gonna stop, because there's not a single team, unit, even support, by the way, in HSR that will last forever. Case in point, the E6 S5 Firefly, right? E6 S5 Firefly, the entire Super Break archetype, it lasted pretty much the entirety of version 2. And even to this day, in some of the different endgame content, you can see that they still feel very, very powerful, right? Or sometimes in Epoch Shadows and Pure Vision, you get a break buff. So they're still going to be feeling very, very good for you as a player, especially if you're a player that decides to feel that power when you wanted to go for their Eidolons, go for their Light Cones, and basically just feel good, right? But there's gonna be a day when that exact same team that you invested your Eidolons, Light Cones, essentially your Stellar Jades, that team is gonna rotate out, because that is sort of like the whole premise behind these endgame environments, to shield the new archetype, new units that will be coming out going forward. And I mentioned this before in a lot of my videos. It's not to say that your units got weaker, right? It's not to say that your old units got nerfed, or like the new units are performing at a substantially better performance than the old units. It's the environment itself is constantly shifting to tailor for the set units. So for example, right, I think Cassius is honestly a very, very good example alongside the Pollux boss, because as a baseline benchmark itself, right, there's almost very little difference between D Herta, Aglaya, Maide, Cassius. Every single one of the V3 DPS, they do feel very, very comparable, especially if you, let's just say you test them against a training dummy, right? If you want to test them against a training dummy, just check out their raw DPS, right? Cost for cost, E1, E2, all that kind of stuff. You'll probably see that there wouldn't be that big of a disparity so far for the entirety of version 3. And I think the only exception to this rule was basically Acheron. Acheron basically killed the entirety of version 1 DPS, and then ever since Acheron, every single version 2 stuck to a standard, because if the version 2 DPS did not start with Acheron standard, then who the fuck is gonna pull for the version 2 DPS? So ever since that precedent was set, which I think it was a little bit too much, version 3 was a lot more tame, comparatively speaking, right? But even so, even if your cast service is gonna be comparing quite similarly to your version 3 DPS, you can see that there is one clear winner in Pollux. Very, very clear. It's gonna be cast service. Just like how in the second half, there's also a very, very clear winner against a TV boss. 5 target. And that is gonna be D Herta. Right, it's gonna be a units like your Tribi, your Dierda, potentially even a Nexa, right? Because this buff is designed to shield for Nexa. So this current format right now, if you had these version 3 units, you're gonna feel the power. You're gonna feel that, oh my god, my units feel good. They feel strong. They're doing what they're supposed to do. And then if you want to chase even more, especially if you put for power using items like coins back then, you put for an E2 Acheron, you put for an E2 Firefly, right? And now you're thinking to yourself, okay, shit, my E0 Caceres is doing more damage than my E2 Firefly against Pollux. Or like my E0 Herta is performing better than my, let's just say, E2 Fei Xiao against the dinosaur boss, right? This mindset, it will become a little bit scary, because you keep thinking to yourself, okay, it's time to pull for this E2. Because this E2 will change everything. E2 Caceres changes everything. E1 Hyacinth changes everything for a Caceres team comp, right? E2 Herta, E1 Maide, when final comes out, who the fuck knows what final is gonna be? Fake collab, God knows, bro. E2 Archer changes everything. Bro, can you imagine that? Imagine that. E0 Saber. E0 Archer is like, okay, yeah, that right. And then if you pull for an E2 Archer, bro summons the real bow, whatever the fuck he says, and he does like 500,000% more damage. Okay, maybe not to that extent, but I would say that this will bring us to the main point of how do you decide whether you should be pulling Eidolons or not. And I will be using Hyacinth as a case study here. So let's say right now, you are a Caceres player. I'm going to be assuming you're a Caceres player. You want to pull Hyacinth for Caceres as a form of a vertical investment, a vertical upgrade. Cost for cost, Stellar Jade for Stellar Jade. In E0 S0 Hyacinth is essentially the same cost, exact same cost as any one of your Eidolons, right? So you decide to say, okay, she is perfect for Caceres. Best in store sustain. Even MrPokke said, you know, oh, she's super good with Caceres. I'm gonna pull for Hyacinth. Great. All right, you put. And now your character's team is gonna feel the power. Now, it might not be for Eidolons, but the objective is still the same, which is why I asked you guys the question, why do you want to pull for Eidolons first? It is to make this team feel strong, right? Make them feel stronger than they were last time. Make them have a greater sense of like flexibility, the suitability. The entire team itself feels better to play when you get these vertical upgrades. And it might not even be strictly from damage numbers. It might just be how the way it plays, right? For example, Aglaia without or with Sunday, you know? I mean, sure, she's gonna probably not be as synergistic. You can still run without Sunday, technically speaking, but it's gonna feel a lot worse. So the same thing is gonna be happening, except that right now, at this current point of time, you really wouldn't feel that big of a difference whether or not your character's team has or does not have high scene, especially against Pollux, which is something that I have brought up in my early access video over here. I basically did the breakdown between the different Memory of Chaos comparisons. This was the first MOC 12 rotation. This was the second MOC 12 rotation. You can see that the difference between Highest and Gallagher is almost indifferent. The only change was Gallagher. We did a 1 cycle instead of a 0 cycle on full auto. And if you did manual, I already done the manual for the character 0 cycle back in my previous video, you can definitely still do a 0 cycle. So you could say that higher scene technically doesn't really change too much for me, especially when compared with Gallagher, because it's basically almost the same thing. And this exact sentiment, it has been, you know, established with Akron and Jiaoqiu, with Firefly and Fuke. You know, I was talking about this in one of my answering your high scene questions. I've literally played these games before 2 times already, mind you, before version 3, right? If somebody already put for an E2 Akron and they're like, okay, my E2 Akron right now, let's just say I'm doing a 0 cycle using an E2 Akron with a Pella, right? With a Pella and Silver Wolf. And if let's just say my E2 Akron, I were to pull for a Jiaoqiu, right? If my Pella and Silver Wolf, okay, let's just say Pella and Silver Wolf did 1 cycle, but after I add in my Jiaoqiu to my E2 Akron, she now does a 0 cycle. Does it really matter that much if I want to pull for this Jiaoqiu? Because it only changed by 1 cycle, right? It is nothing too crazy anyways. Or even this Epoch, okay, I saved me like 100 and roughly 150 action value. And for Pure Vision, both runs, I cleared in the exact same amount of cycles remaining. So by all metrics, you could say, yeah, I don't need Jiaoqiu, right? It is basically the same thing. All right, I'm getting this teeny weeny bit of upgrade. I'm just gonna skip him. Nothing is gonna change. It doesn't matter. Same thing can also be said for Firefly. Firefly does not need Fuke, or at least not as much as Reba needs Fuke. I think this sentiment was also established quite a while back. Like, Reba needs Fuke way more than Firefly, and Firefly doesn't need her. But eventually, you're gonna see that that was because of the environment. That was because of the environment back then. While it's not as crazy as, for example, Pollux for Caceres, you will still feel that these DPSs that you invested, especially for an Eidolons, you wanted to make them feel stronger. You will still feel that, shit, why does my E2 Akron not feel like the way she did 3 or 4 MOC rotations back then? Power creep? HP inflation? Is it because I need Jiaoqiu? Do I need Jiaoqiu now? Shit, do I have to pull for Jiaoqiu? And I feel a very, very similar thing is likely gonna happen to Caceres and High Scene. Right now, there probably isn't too big of a difference between the impact of having Higher Scene or having Gallagher in Caceres, especially if your metrics for measurement is against Pollux. But after, not just 1, right? But after 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all these ammo 1 year later, right? I think it's good that players are more aware of the reality that is, even if you put for Eidolons with the intention of making your units feel stronger, to feel their power more, the end game environment will never focus on the old units. It's just business, right? They will always make the end game environment target the new banners coming out. For this banner, for next banner, for version 4, version 5, version 6, whatever it's gonna be. Because the sales have already been made for older units in HSR. Now, if you want to continue to feel the same power, right? Even though you are gonna be investing a heck of a lot more resources into that same team comp, you're just gonna have to suck it up and do it. Because you can't really expect your old units at that level of strength in that environment designed to make that old unit feel strong, perform the same as the future units coming out with an environment designed for them and their kits most likely having the improvements or a different playstyle compared to the old units. For example, you played Super Break. You invested E2 Firefly. Fuck you even invested in like an E1 Rame, right? You can't really expect this super break team to still have like the easiest, best performance in your endgame content in version 2, just like in version 3 right now, because they are no longer catering to super break. I feel like this is not so much got to do with making the enemies artificially more difficult, but it is more so to the fact that they designed the enemies to make new units feel their power without giving them the requirements for Eidolons and Lycoons. And once that has been aware by you, right? Once you actually know this is the case that's happening, then it becomes very, very easy for you to realize when should you pull for an Eidolon and when should you pull for a Lycoon. And the answer is this, right? Right now, if you are a player with, let's just say you have 80 pulls, you want to pull for higher scene, you pull for higher scene. But in the process of you getting higher scene, you are going to be left with, let's just say you're left with nothing, right? No pulls. But you also want to get a fake collab, or you want to get Finon, or you want to get whatever unit that's going to be coming out next time, right? So at that point, you must ask yourself, are you okay with the potential of not feeling this power when the subsequent rotations, the subsequent environments, the subsequent units comes out, and they will have the environments molded for them? Like I would, I'm just gonna go out and make a crazy theory. Final is probably gonna be really, really good when it comes out. Yeah, we're probably gonna be getting a boss that's gonna make Final feel like a fucking god, probably, right? As a DPS, he's probably gonna be, performing a lot better than what you guys are expecting. He's gonna feel easier to play. He's gonna feel more synergistic. Fuck, maybe even Saber might come out being like a fucking tier 0 DPS. Because the endgame environment is gonna be designing targeted to make their kids shine the most. After this period goes away, so after this promotional period goes away, you make the pull. Now you have a decision. Do you want to pull for the next thing that will also get the spotlight in terms of these kind of environments? Or do you want to stick with the units that you already pulled for in terms of vertical investments? So if I were a Casualist main, me personally, I would go for an E0 S0 higher scene. I wouldn't really consider the Eidolon of higher scene, even though she is super, super good, right? Even though E1 higher scene is like super, super synergistic with Casualist, I feel like me personally as a player, getting an E0 S0 right now is fine. Even though I might not feel that power of E1 higher scene right now, it's okay for me, because what's gonna happen in reality is that next time when all these different units come out, you are still not gonna feel the power regardless anyways. You will never feel as strong as you are in this point of time the moment the shilling environment goes away. So whether or not I get this E1 or don't get this E1, it doesn't change the fact that all these new content coming out, these new units coming out, they will always feel good to play as a player, as a streamer, as a consumer, right? So in the future, let's just say I am gonna be somebody that I'm committed to pulling for Casualist, and I still want to, feel the power like as close to as she once was last time, then maybe by then I can consider pull for a E1 higher scene, because by the next time the same rotation comes out, I basically have more freedom as a player to choose. Okay, should I start pulling for the next support? For example, I pulled for like 3 different DPSs, right? Do I really want to pull for the 4th DPS and skip Tribi? Or should I finally decide to pull for Tribi and actually log into, starting to build my army of supports in Honkai Star Rail, right? So hopefully this answers a question. I feel like this is not so much of a guide, but more so much of like a food for thought. Why exactly do you as a player pull for Eidolons or Lycoons in HSR? Because a unit's launch will always feel good. But when a unit's launch goes away and the environments change, you will always feel worse. Maybe you felt better with the Eidolon, maybe you felt better with the Lycoon, but it doesn't change the fact that you will still feel worse in the future. Whether or not somebody pulled for an E0 Firefly or an E2 Firefly back then, both of them will still feel worse at this point right now if you want to run them against Pollux. It just is. And the Eidolon wouldn't really change that. So hopefully this thought process can help players, understand a little bit better of like their spending decisions and gamble decisions in Honkai Starbucks. And hopefully this also helps you guys make less of a gamba addict and just fucking pull Tribi, bro. Like what? So if that will come to the end of today's content, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Word of the day is going to be, it won't. Join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join Twitter, join Twitter. All the best. We'll see you guys next time. Take care.